Before I get started, if y'all want to pray with me over this lesson. Dear Lord, I thank you for this morning. I thank you for allowing each and every person to be here, God. That I ask that you have your hands over the Sunday school lesson, God, that you use me this morning and that you have me say what you want me to say. Lord, I thank you for all that you did for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, the first thing I want to point out is whenever something takes time in our life, what do we do in that moment?
Wait.
Grin and bear it.
Good job. So yes, whenever we have something in our life, God may promise us, or we may have something in our life that we're waiting for. It takes time, and in that moment, we do wait. And so, the point of this lesson this morning is for us to realize that no matter what we do, and no matter where we start in our life, on the new path, on the new journey, listening to a call that God has put on our hearts and in our lives, that we don't give up whenever we are in that season of waiting. I'm going to go to Isaiah 40 and 31. And it says, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not grow weary. They shall walk and not faint." And what that verse means to me is it's in telling to us that we need to be patient whenever we're waiting on God to fulfill a promise. But God also promises us strength whenever we're in a season of waiting. Whenever we're in a season where we may feel like we're defeated, God gives us strength. When we are waiting, it is not mean empty space, empty time. Because in our life, there's a season for everything. There's a season for action. Whenever God calls us to do something, we need to step up and answer that calling. There's a season of rest whenever we fulfill a calling that God has put on our hearts and in our minds. Whenever we do what God wants us to do, there's a season of rest. And there's also a season of waiting. Whenever we're waiting on God to tell us what to do next. Whenever we're waiting in our lives and we ourselves don't know what to do, we wait on God to speak to us. God rewards diligence, He rewards faith, and He rewards us whenever we don't give up and we trust in Him. I'm going to read Genesis chapter 39, starting at verse 17. I'm going to read a few chapters in Genesis as well. I'm going to go to 39, starting at verse 17. I'm going to go ahead and read it. "And she spake unto him according to these words." She is Joseph's master's wife. "She spake unto her husband, Joseph's master, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. And he was there in the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand at the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it, he being Joseph. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it prosper. In that moment, once Joseph was thrown in prison, he entered a season of waiting for a purpose from God. And what Joseph did not do was turn against God in a moment where he was being thrown into prison for something that he did not do. So, I'm going to continue reading on to chapter 40. Starting at verse 1, and it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wrath against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in the ward in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in the ward. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker, the king of Egypt, which were bound in prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them I pray you. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me. And in the vine there was 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters therefore brought forth grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head, and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner when thou wast his butler. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. In that moment Joseph was eager to let God use him for that interpretation. But he was also, his heart was crying out. Because, being in prison for something he didn't do, he not yet know his purpose. And so in that moment, he's crying out for him to make mention of him once he is free from prison, to remember him for his interpretation. I'm going to continue reading on. Verse 15. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket there was of all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of my basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from thee. And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler into his butlership again, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. But did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but in chapter 41:1, and it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. So after reading the story of Joseph and what he was going through in his life then, you could see how Joseph was waiting in his life. He listened to God and he let God use him by his gifts of interpretation. But it took 2 years for Joseph to receive, what God was calling him for whenever he was in the prison. So Joseph is one of the examples in the Bible of waiting. We never know how long we're going to have to wait on something in our life. It could be a day, it could be a month, it could be a year, it could be 10, 30 years. We never know. But that's where faith comes in. Whenever we have faith in God and we don't lose that hope that God promised me something, that He's going to fulfill it no matter when I think I should get it. Hold on 1 second. Moses is another example in the Bible of having to wait. Moses led the Israelites out of bondage, out of slavery. And do y'all know how long they had to wait in the wilderness? 40 years. And they had to wait that long due to lack of faith. Lack of faith in God. Whenever they're in that moment in the wilderness and they look around at what they don't have. They look around at the water they don't have. They look around at the food that they don't have. Being in slavery, all that, was provided for them. They suffered, but they knew what they did have. So whenever they were in the wilderness, they didn't know whenever they were going to see that promised land. And that's where they lacked faith. Exodus 14:11. And they said unto Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said unto his people, fear ye not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show you today. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. So once they were taken out of slavery, they were free. But they didn't see freedom in what they had. Because, they were so worried about what they didn't have anymore. So whenever I talk about it takes time, the question I have today is it takes time, but do we have the time? Do we make the time? Do we take the time out of our day to pray to God? We have a choice in our life whenever we wait. We have free will. We can do what we want. In our waiting, we can take matters into our own hands and, give ourselves what we think we should have. We tell ourselves, we don't know that I'm going to have this, so I'm just going to take matters in my own hands and I'm going to get it today, instead of trusting on God. Do we have the time to be patient and diligent to God's calling and word in our life? Whenever we're waiting on God, waiting on an answer, waiting on God's voice to tell us what to do next, we have to put away distractions. Because if we have distractions in our ear, we're looking at distractions, we're hearing distractions, you're not going to hear God tell you what to do next. Because you're going to have a fog in front of you, you're going to have a fog in your eyes. You're not going to be able to see God. We all cook or make stuff. Whenever I was thinking about waiting, I thought about, one of the things I always dislike doing is waiting on food whenever I'm hungry. I get hungry. And so, like a recipe, they all take different amounts of time. They all take different ingredients. I love to bake. If you bake a cupcake rather than a cake, it takes less time. So that's what I like to do. But like a recipe in our lives, the time it takes to bake, that is the time that we are waiting. We never know how long we're going to have to wait. We never know, like I said, it could be a day, it could be months, it could be a year, and that's where faith comes in. Because, we have to wait on God. And then like a recipe, I said they all require different ingredients. And that's what we need in our life. Some of us we do good at some things and we don't do good at others. We have to work on some things. We have to learn to read our Bibles. We have to learn to pray to God.
Right.
There's days where you have a great day, you have a good day, and you don't even think about praying to God because nothing's wrong. That used to be something that I struggled with, was I found myself only talking to God whenever I needed something, or whenever I was hurting, I was in pain, or whenever I had a family member, I could see what they were going through. But whenever everything was good, I found myself not talking to God, not praying to God, not thanking God for the things that I had. Going back to the recipe analogy, whenever we make stuff, you can't skip ingredients because it won't turn out good. If you don't season it, it'll be bland. If you don't put flour or eggs in it, it won't rise. Whenever your recipe is missing something, you notice there's a difference, either by looking at it or by tasting it. And so, applying that back to our lives, we can't skip steps. We can't be lazy. We can't, backslide and then try to go 10 steps forward too fast. So, Joseph and Moses, they waited in confinement, and Moses waited, with nothing. They were in the wilderness. Another example that I wanted to mention was Job. Whenever he lost everything that he had, and he was in pain with sores all over his body. He didn't know what to do next. He had nothing but his wife. In that season, Job was waiting and suffering. We all have something in our lives that we're going through. We're all waiting on something. We could be waiting and suffering, like Job. We could be hurting, but we still have to pray and talk to God through that suffering. Like Moses and the Israelites, when they had nothing, you could be losing a job, you could be losing a family member, friend in your life, physically, or, you had to cut off a relationship with them or something. Whenever you feel like you have nothing left in you, you have to wait with faith in God. Whenever you're in confinement, like Joseph was in prison, you have to wait on God and trust in God and pray to God. And some things you can do while you're waiting, like I've said all morning, is you can pray to God. God is always listening. God always knows what we need. We may pray for it, and God may not answer because He knows at that moment we do not need it. And we have to have faith in God whenever He says no. While we're waiting, we don't need to force something that's not yet supposed to happen. The Bible says, "Be still and know that I am God." That means don't take matters into your own hands. Trust God for who He is and in your life, and He'll provide what you need in that moment. And something else we can do while we're waiting is to remain faithful. It's hard to remain faithful whenever you can't physically see, the answer that God's going to give you. You can't physically see the amount of time you're going to have to wait. But we have to remain faithful in our waiting.
I want to know a bunch of things, really. But one thing I'd like to ask you is, are you aware of any way to differentiate or separate your thoughts going on in your head and God's thoughts He's putting into you?
Differentiate what you think and what...
Yeah, how do you tell the difference between what you're thinking and what God's making you think?
Well, God can answer you in different ways. Like God can put people in your life to answer you. Yeah. There's times whenever God puts on my heart and tells me, I need to pray for someone. And, God can speak to you through other people. He can speak to you through a song, that comes on the radio or on your phone. When you listen to the words and you realize that that's God answering you. The only thing I can say is whenever in your heart you want something, you're constantly going to think about it. And so what I would do is pray about, what you're thinking. Pray about what you're wanting. I can't really give you an answer of how to differentiate the two.
So you guys have a small, quiet, or less intense voice. Small voice.
John?
And of course, you can always, whenever you feel something might be about, I suggest you always text Pastor and ask him if he can help guide you. Maybe, may not be.
I can't text with a flip, man.
No. Well, the next time you come to service, when Pastor's here, you talk to him about it. He can help you.
He gave me a notepad.
Write it down.
Questions.
Exactly, write it down. He'll take care of you.
Do I have any other questions, comments? It's okay. We all are dismissed.